Good afternoon. Hope y'all staying cool. Trying to anyway. If you want a title for this sermon, I would have it as The Promise of Prophecy. I can't think of another one. We'll go with that one. And before August is over with, early this month, over 80 years ago, on August 2nd, 1939, just before the beginning of World War II, Albert Einstein wrote to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Einstein and several other scientists told Roosevelt of the efforts of Nazi Germany to purify uranium-235, which could be used to build an atomic bomb. It was shortly thereafter that the United States government began the serious undertaking known then only as the Manhattan Project. Simply put, the Manhattan Project was committed to expediting research that would produce a viable atomic bomb. Now, over the course of 6 years, from 1939 to 1945, more than $2 billion was spent during the history of the Manhattan Project. The formulas for refining uranium and putting together a working atomic bomb were created and seen to their logical ends by some of the greatest minds of our time. Chief among the people who unleashed that power of the atom was J. Robert Oppenheimer, who oversaw the project from conception to completion. Hollywood just recently has put out and created a movie entitled by that same name, Oppenheimer. It's the biography and the drama of that scientist that went through that. In its competition with that movie of Hollywood, Barbie is on the second of the list. I haven't seen either movie, but if I had a choice, I don't think I'd go see Barbie. I'd rather see the other one. Now, the article I'm quoting from continues. It says, at exactly 5:29:45 seconds, Mountain War Time, on July 16, 1945, and a white blaze that stretched from the basin of the Jemez Mountains in northern New Mexico to the still dark skies, quote, the gadget, unquote, ushered in the atomic age. The light of the explosion then turned orange as the atomic fireball began shooting upwards at 360 feet per second, reddening and pulsing as it cooled. The characteristic mushroom cloud of radioactive vapor materialized at 30,000 feet, and beneath the cloud, all that remained of the soil at the blast site were fragments of jade green radioactive glass created by that heat of the reaction. The brilliant light from the detonation pierced the early morning skies with such intensity that residents from a faraway neighboring community would swear that the sun came up twice that day. Even more astonishing is that a blind girl saw the flash 120 miles away. Upon witnessing the explosion, its creators had mixed reactions about it. Isidore Rabia, consultant to the Manhattan Project, attended the quote-unquote Trinity test in July 1945. He felt that the equilibrium in nature had been upset, as if humankind had become a threat to the world it inhabited. J. Robert Oppenheimer, though ecstatic about the success of the project, quoted a remembered fragment from a Bhagavad Gita, which is a part of the Hindu religious ceremony scriptures, a book that they got, that says, I am become death, he said, the destroyer of worlds. Ken Bainbridge, who was the test director, told Oppenheimer, now we're all sons of bitches, unquote. In all of human history from its creation, the atomic bomb has been used only twice in modern warfare. Quote, in the early morning hours of August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay took off from the island of Tinian and headed north by northwest toward Japan. The bomber's primary target was the city of Hiroshima, located on the deltas of southwestern Honshu Island facing the inland sea. Hiroshima had a civilian population of almost 300,000 and was an important military center containing about 43,000 soldiers. The bomber, piloted by the commander of the 509th Composite Group, Colonel Paul Tibbets, flew at low altitude on automatic pilot before he started climbing to 31,000 feet as it neared the target area. At approximately 8:15 a.m. Hiroshima time, the Enola Gay released quote-unquote little boy, was what it's called, its 9,700-pound uranium gun-type bomb over the city. Tibbets immediately dove away to avoid the anticipated shock wave. 43 seconds later, a huge explosion lit the morning sky as Little Boy detonated 1,900 feet above the city, directly over a parade field where soldiers of the Japanese Second Army were doing calisthenics. Though already 11.5 miles away, the Enola Gay was rocked by the blast. At first, Tibbets thought he was taking flak. After a second shock wave reflected from the ground hit the plane, the crew looked back at Hiroshima. Quote, "The city was hidden by that awful cloud, boiling up, mushrooming, terrible, and incredibly tall," Tibbets recalled. The yield of the explosion was later estimated at 15 kilotons, the equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT. "My God, what have we done?" asked Robert Lewis, which was the co-pilot of the Enola Gay. On the ground, moments before the blast, it was a calm and sunny Monday morning. An air raid alert from earlier that morning had been called off after only a solitary aircraft was seen, which was actually the weather plane passing over. And by 8:15, the city was alive with activity, soldiers doing their morning calisthenics, commuters on foot or on bicycles, groups of women and children working outside to clear the fire breaks. It's just an ordinary day. Those closest to the explosion died instantly. Their bodies turned to black char. Nearby birds burst into flames in midair, and dry combustible materials such as paper instantly ignited as far away as 6,400 feet from ground zero. The white light acted as a giant flashbulb, burning the dark patterns of clothing on the skin and the shadows of bodies on the walls. Survivors outdoors close to the blast generally describe a literal blinding light combined with a sudden and overwhelming wave of heat. The effects of radiation are usually not immediately apparent. The blast wave followed almost immediately for those close in, often knocking them off their feet. Those that were indoors were usually spared the flash burns, but flying glass from broken windows filled most rooms, and all but the very strongest structures collapsed. One boy was blown through the windows of his house and across the street as the house collapsed behind him. Within minutes, 9 out of 10 people half a mile or less from ground zero were dead. People farther from the point of detonation experienced first a flash and heat, followed seconds later by a deafening boom and a blast wave. Nearly every structure within 1 mile of ground zero was destroyed, and almost every building within 3 miles was damaged. Less than 10% of the buildings in the city survived without any damage, and the blast wave shattered glass in suburbs 12 miles away. That's like from here to La Place. The most common first reaction of those that were indoors even miles from ground zero was that their building had just suffered a direct hit by a bomb. Small ad hoc rescue parties soon began to operate, but roughly half of the city's population was dead or injured. And in those areas most seriously affected, virtually no one escaped serious injury. The numerous small fires that erupted simultaneously all around the city soon merged into one large firestorm, creating extremely strong winds that blew towards the center of the fire. The firestorm eventually engulfed 4.4 square miles of the city, killing anyone who had not escaped in the first minutes after the attack. One post-war study of the victims of Hiroshima found that less than 4.5% of survivors suffered leg fractures. Such injuries were not uncommon. It was just that most who could not walk were engulfed by the firestorm. Even after the flames had subsided, relief from the outside was slow in coming. For hours after the attack, the Japanese government did not even know for sure what had happened. Radio and telegraph communications from Hiroshima had suddenly ended at 8:16 a.m., and vague reports of some sort of large explosion had begun to filter in. but the Japanese high command knew that no large-scale air raid had taken place over the city and that there were no large stores of explosions there. Nothing was stored in that area. Eventually, a Japanese staff officer was dispatched by plane to survey the city from overhead, and while he was still nearly 100 miles away from the city, he began to report on a huge cloud of smoke that hung over it. The first confirmation of exactly what had happened came only 16 hours later with the announcement of the bombing by the United States. Relief workers from outside the city eventually began to arrive and the situation stabilized somewhat. Power in undamaged areas of the city was even restored on August 7th, with limited rail service resuming the following day. Several days after the blast, however, medical staff began to recognize the first symptoms of radiation sickness among the survivors. And soon the death rate actually began to climb again as patients who had appeared to be recovering began suffering from this strange new illness. Deaths from radiation sickness did not peak until 3 or 4 weeks after the attacks and did not taper off until 7 to 8 weeks after the attack. Long-range health dangers associated with radiation exposure, such as increased danger of cancer, would linger for the rest of the victims' lives, as would the psychological effects of the attack. No one will ever know for certain how many died as a result of the attack on Hiroshima. Some 70,000 people probably died as a result of the initial blast, heat, and radiation effects. This included about 20 American airmen being held as prisoners in the city. By the end of 1945, because of the lingering effects of the radioactive fallout and other after effects, the Hiroshima death toll was probably over 100,000. The 5-year death total may have reached or even exceeded 200,000 as cancer and other long-term effects took hold. At 11 a.m. August 6, Washington, D.C. time, radio stations began playing a prepared statement from President Truman informing the American public that the United States had dropped an entirely new type of bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, an atomic bomb. Truman warned that if Japan still refused to surrender unconditionally as demanded by the Potsdam Declaration of July 26th earlier, the United States would attack additional targets with equally devastating results. 2 days later, on August 8th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and attacked Japanese forces in Manchuria, ending American hopes that the war would end before Russian entry into the Pacific theater. By August 9th, American aircraft were showering leaflets all over Japan, informing its people that, quote, "We are in possession of the most destructive explosive ever devised by man. A single one of our newly developed atomic bombs is actually the equivalent in explosive power to what 2,000 of our giant B-29s can carry on a single mission. This awful fact is one for you to ponder, and we solemnly assure you it is grimly accurate. We have just begun to use this weapon against your homeland. If you still have any doubt, make inquiry as to what happened to Hiroshima when just one atomic bomb fell on that city." Meanwhile, that's unquote. That was a leaflet that was dropped. Meanwhile, Tibbetts bomber group was simply waiting for the weather to clear in order to drop its next bomb, the plutonium implosion weapon nicknamed Fat Man that was destined for the city of Nagasaki. Zechariah 14, verse 12 says, "And this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand on their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth," unquote. Just like a bomb. On August 9th, of course, 1945, Nagasaki fell to the same treatment. Though Fat Man missed its target by over 1.5 miles, it still leveled nearly half the city. In a split second, Nagasaki's population dropped from 422,000 to 383,000. Over 25,000 people were injured. Japan offered to surrender on August 10th, 1945. Physicists who have studied these two atomic explosions estimate that the bombs utilized only 1/10 of 1% of the respective explosive capabilities. Turn to Isaiah 4:54. You can look up the history of the atomic bomb And you can read much, much more of its development and its timeline. And if you think about what we have today in multiples, I think by the mid-70s they stated that we're able to blow up 150 of these worlds, this world that we live on. That's a lot of power. Isaiah 54, breaking into the middle of God's love for us, which he always talks about throughout the scriptures. In verse 9, for this is as the waters of Noah unto me, for as I have sworn that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth, so have I sworn that I would not be wroth with thee, nor rebuke thee. For the mountains shall depart, and the hills be removed, but my kindness shall not depart from thee, neither shall the covenant of my peace be removed, says the Lord that has mercy on you. Verse 14, in righteousness shall you be established. You shall be far from oppression, for you shall not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near you. Behold, they shall surely gather together, but not by me. Whosoever shall gather together against you shall fall for your sake. Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, and that brings forth an instrument for his work. And I have created the waster to destroy. Verse 17, no weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, says the Lord. World War II, we know, ended by the mistakes that were made by Adolf Hitler. While his war campaign continued its destruction of the Western European nations, his choice to create a movement towards the east and conquer Russia finished him off. Beyond crazy, his mind, I believe, was influenced by Satan himself. But that is not what the history books will tell anybody. In the midst of both wars was a world in economic collapse. Our American history books mark it as the Great Depression. We all know this. Yet out of the ashes of a destroyed Europe came the rebuilding process. And in the rebuilding process of a physical Western Europe came the Iron Curtain. Though Germany was divided in half due to Communist Russia's gain of certain territory, Western Europe simmered down to what became known as the Cold War. The think tank of Western Europe began in an unsettled state of mind and with no faith in what the future would hold. Of course not, with that atomic bomb. The idea was the United Europe at that time was born. In 1950, the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman announced a plan proposing the pooling of European coal and steel production under a common authority. The Schuman Declaration was regarded as the first step towards achieving a united Europe. Belgium, the Federal Republic of Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands accepted the French proposal and signed the European Coal and Steel Community Treaty in 1951, or the ECSC. In 1954, the plan to create a European Defense Community, EDC, was refused by the French Parliament, and as a result, it collapsed. In its place, the Western European Union, or WEU, was created as a subgroup of NATO. Encouraged by the success of the ECSC, European leaders decided to continue the unification of Europe on the economic front. Two more treaties were established in 1957, the European Economic Community, or EEC, to merge separate national markets into a single market that would ensure the free movement of goods, people, capital, and services with a wide measure of common policies, and the European Atomic Energy Community, or Euratom, to further the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Isaiah 43 is interesting. I often wondered why God would allow war or the death of thousands of people. I thought deeply on how God's ways, of course, are not our way of thinking. I thought about how God would tell ancient Israel to kill another nation, every man, every woman, every child, and even their animals. Isaiah 43 verse 1 says, but now thus says the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee, I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Savior. I gave Egypt for thy ransom, Ethiopia and Seba for you. Since thou wast precious in my sight, thou hast been honorable, and I have loved thee. Therefore will I give men for thee, and people for thy life. I thought about that and how we don't speak German as our official language today because of God's unseen hand in that war. And you can write down and make a note and read the entire chapter of 43, and if you want, you can keep on reading from there. And when you get to chapter 57, verse 1, stop and think about how merciful God really is and how only He knows how much a person can endure. Quote, the righteous perishes and no man lays it to heart. The merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. Unquote. The fulfilling of God, but the fulfilling of prophecy by God is indeed a promise. One of the very proofs that God exists, of course, is fulfilled prophecy, which is simply history written in advance. When Jesus Christ spoke to his disciples in Matthew 24, he mentioned by name the key prophetic writings of Daniel. If God's word is meaningless and untrue, then the prophecies will fail. In Daniel 12, the last chapter, God inspired Daniel to write in verse 8, and I heard, but I understood not, and then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed to the time of the end. Verse 13, but go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest, or die and rest, and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. Daniel will be resurrected, and he will be able to see in detail the visions of prophecy that he was revealed over 2,500 years ago. In Daniel 7, he's given the interpretation of a vision he had described earlier in the chapter. Daniel will now understand what had troubled him when he was inspired to write it as a human being. Verse 17, these great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. For the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever, even forever and ever. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of a brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spoke very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand unto a time, a times, and dividing of time. In verse 26, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts troubled me, and my incontinence changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. The abomination of desolation that Christ spoke of in Matthew 24 cannot happen until, of course, the uniting of Europe occurs. Inside this united Europe, 10 kings will make their stand. In verse 24, and the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them. For years, I've always kept harping and talking about the united Europe. or the European Union. I studied and followed all the news. I subscribed to a lot of the European magazines and the books. But in particular, I kept talking about the treaties and their laws. I kept speaking about an article from the laws called Enhanced Cooperation. I went beyond a study of American and Britain and prophecy and a million other history books, it felt like. Like the disciples of Jesus Christ, when they questioned him on the Mount of Olives, I also wanted to know when, and we all do. I remember, I don't know which year it was, Pentecost weekend, when Garnett Armstrong had a campaign there at one of the high schools. And we were there, I guess, about a half hour or so before he came up to do a sermon. He walked by the little table we were set up at to run the sound system. And I had brought a couple of European magazines, and we were having a conversation about things. The conversation that we had, it didn't last very long because he went over my head. He was excited to talk about Europe, but he went way over my head because of all the information and knowledge that he knew. And it was from that point on that I was determined to try to understand as much as I could, because he had a lot of information that I was wrong on, of course. For decades, though, the late Garnett Armstrong and also his father before him, the late Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, they've been stating that a 10-nation combined European power would emerge under the leadership of France and Germany. And they refer back to those three verses in Revelation 17, verse 12, 13, and 14, which says, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful." This is talking about the time of the end. In 1990, he wrote a book called The United States of Europe, When? In that first paragraph, I'll quote, "Since the 1950s, I have been proclaiming that America will one day be stunned by the emergence of a new power bloc in Europe, that America and the Soviet Union would not go to war, that a reunited Germany would be pivotal to a future United States of Europe. Now suddenly the walls come tumbling down in Europe, governments topple in but days, the global news media begins frantically writing about the reunification of Germany, and from the White House to London, urgent meetings behind the scenes discuss the destabilization of Europe, the power vacuum in East Germany, the nightmarish economic, sociological, and political problems for which no immediate solutions are evident." Quote, "And everyone was so surprised, but for me," he says, "and those of us in this work, the only surprising part was how quickly so many events in Europe occurred." That was when the walls, remember when Reagan talked about Gorbachev, tear down that wall? And that's what happened, the reunification of Germany. Later on in that book, he gives excerpts to those new in the church, and he proved that he and his father before him knew exactly what was coming. 77070678-2. That was my Plain Truth magazine subscription number on the front of it. I'll never forget that number. I don't know why. It's just like a driver's license number or something. But the Plain Truth magazine was all over the world back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was everywhere. I'll read an excerpt that he talked about. Plain Truth magazine, June 1952, page 11. "The 10 horns in the 17th chapter of Revelation will be the revival of the beast, the Roman Empire, out of the bottomless pit by the United States of Europe, or federation of 10 European nations within the bounds of the old Roman Empire, and that includes Eastern Europe." There is no way to know this back in 1952. Not until the Reagan years of the 80s that we found out, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, why must the Eastern Bloc European nations be included? Why? If we restudy the image of Daniel 2, we understand what the representation of the two arms are. The Medo-Persian Empire, or the two arms of silver. The two legs, of course, after the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, are represented by the divisions of the Roman Empire, east and west. And the revival of this last empire are represented by the 10 toes, 5 toes on each foot. It makes sense. The plain truth, September 1952 again. The beast is rising up. This is in page 1. Paris, France, while the eyes of the world are focused solely on the danger of communism, America is completely overlooking the greatest danger the world has ever known, a new power to rise up in Europe, a combination of 10 nations that will crush out Western civilization. A couple years later, in 1954, and now on page 2, a short 9 years after Churchill had said the Western Allies should ensure all German industry capable of producing arms be eliminated, behold, the spectacle of Washington and London making every possible diplomatic effort backed by American dollars to do two things: create the United States of Europe and to rearm Germany. There is only one nation that possesses the industry, the energy, the purpose, and the power to provide leadership within the new European empire, and that is Germany. And once they rise to leadership within the new united European empire, once its great predominant military force is created and united under German militarism, as it inevitably would be, it would be the height of folly to suppose that they would accept any further dominance from Britain or America. They're already losing faith in America today. In 1962, on the World Tomorrow program, in the pages of the Plain Truth, he says, "We've been shouting to a heedless world for many years this was going to occur. It would come as an economic force, bringing unprecedented prosperity to Europe. But also it is to become a political and military combine, a gigantic third power block in the world that will include more population, greater manpower, and possibly even greater military resources than either the United States or Russia. When this giant combine, a United States of Europe, finally emerges as such before a startled and dumbfounded world, it will last only a very short time. It will fight against Jesus Christ at his second coming." 1962 again in November, he says, "Forming is a great power in Europe we foretold many years ago. The coming United States of Europe, foretold in these pages when the world scoffed at it." And later in page 10, the same article, "Just as certainly as we restore Western Europe to economic prosperity and then to military power, a successor to Hitler will emerge, gain control of this power through a United States of Europe, which we, the United States government, are also encouraging. And we shall then wake up too late to realize we have restored our fascist enemy the power to destroy us. Battlefields are becoming economic, just as we said they would. The movement is forming towards complete political solidification." 1963 of January in the Plain Truth. Page 5 says, "Daring new plans for monetary reform and economic planning are on the drawing boards. These will so inextricably mesh the economies of the six reports time that they will clear the way for a final goal of a political united Europe." Same article later on. "So Germany, not atheistic communist Russia, is ultimately going to support an Arab Union against the Jews and against Israel, Britain, and America. This is what prophecy foretells." 1964. "Now the specter of a united Europe is suddenly looming up. The United States is oblivious to this new threat to its power. When will we wake up and realize that what is shaping up in Europe is a revival of fascism under the cloak of European unity?" It's December 64. "God shows that in this end time he is going to use the modern Assyrians, the Germans, to dominate a united Europe." 1965 of April. In spite of Mr. Churchill's farsightedness, written just after Churchill's death, he could not see far enough into the future to visualize the outcome of the United States of Europe. He did not know from Bible prophecy that it would be comprised of 10 nations, dominated politically by a Roman fascist-like system and religiously by a great universal militant church. He could not foresee that this great political, religious, economic power block of 10 nations not only would refuse Britain membership in the final United States of Europe, the 10, but would ultimately prove the undoing of the Anglo-Saxon people of America, Britain, and the Commonwealth countries. June 1965. The real strength of Spain lies in Europe. For years we've said on the World Tomorrow program, of which I was the voice for about 25 years, and predicted these pages that the United States of Europe was coming. 1967. The memory of unity and strength of the Roman Empire has begun to fire the imagination of Europeans. A 10-nation united Western Europe with its influence reaching around the world is prophesied to become the vital center of world trade and political religious affairs. Rome is destined to play a most important role in the political and religious future of Europe and the whole world. In that same book, it had a lot in it, but in that same book, the subtitle, it says, "Who are the final 10?" Quote, he says, "The 10 nations or kings are not together yet. At this writing, which is 1990, it's difficult to say which nations will comprise the 10 kings of Bible prophecy. It may be a many years long process. It will take time. Following the shocking developments in Eastern Europe, the EEC may not develop as it has been planned. The common market may become a dinosaur within months, discarded in favor of other, more lucrative trading preferences." Quote, "Because we know Britain and some of the Scandinavian countries, perhaps much of Belgium, and at least a northern portion of France are Israelish stock, we have speculated that these people may not be included in the final United States of Europe, if that's what it's ultimately called, but that some of the Western European nations may find themselves excluded, or in Britain's case, may simply withdraw in protest as a completely new and different alignment of European nations is formed," unquote. And that happened. Remember Brexit? A few years back when Britain said, "No, we're getting out of the Union." And they did. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, it goes on and on and on. You could go back and Google a lot of things that he said that have come to pass in these years. And it's all relative to what's going on today that we see in the world. Looking at the analogy of God's church that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, I think of what I've studied, we've all studied and proven on a personal level. In verse 7 of 1 Corinthians 3, he writes, "So then neither is he that plants anything, neither he that waters, but God that gives the increase. Now he that plants and he that waters are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. For we are laborers together with God, you are God's husbandry, you are God's building. According to the grace of God which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I've laid the foundation, and another builds thereon. But let every man take heed how he builds thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ of Nazareth." If I'm the water to take care of what has been planted in my mind, then my only source or water supply source is from Jesus Christ of Nazareth, period, and his scriptures. Ezekiel 12, verses 17 through 23 says, "Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, eat thy bread with quaking, and drink thy water with trembling and with carefulness. And say unto the people of the land, Thus says the Lord God of the inhabitants of Jerusalem and of the land of Israel, They shall eat their bread with carefulness and drink their water with astonishment, that her land may be desolate from all that is therein, because of the violence of all them that dwell therein. Verse 19, and the cities that are inhabited shall be laid waste, and the land shall be desolate, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, what is that proverb that you have in the land of Israel, saying, the days are prolonged and every vision fails, like the scoffers that we hear about today? All these things have always happened. Verse 23, tell them therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will make this proverb to cease, and they shall no more use it as a proverb in Israel. But say unto them, the days are at hand, and the effect of every vision. Sometimes we do make mistakes. We've always made mistakes, but a lot of them we have speculations of prophecy that we don't really define as speculation, and they become doctrine. We have to be careful with that. A lot of mistakes that have happened in the church in the past. We know for certain that specific things are foretold to happen, but sometimes we just don't know how. A lot of times we just don't know how. And sometimes hindsight shows us that we were right on certain things. Look back at the timeline of Europe after World War II. The process of European integration was launched on May 9, 1950, when France officially proposed to create the first concrete foundation of a European federation. 6 countries, interesting number, joined from the beginning: Belgium, Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. In 1973, Denmark, Ireland, and the UK joined. The total kingdoms became 9. And I can see why the Worldwide Church of God started setting dates and believing their various speculations. I remember a return of Jesus Christ to be in the year 1975, written in some of the letters. But of course, 1975 came and 1975 went. Meanwhile, Garnet Ted Armstrong, doing TV programs at Middle Eastern locations, had very strong disagreements concerning the setting of dates as well as that physical place of safety. There were many factors involved, yet he and his father separated in 1978, to say the least. In 1981, Greece became the 10th nation to join the EU. Now what? Because we were looking for 10 kings. But 1986, Spain and Portugal became 12. 1995, Austria, Finland, and Sweden became 15. Back in 2004, after 4 waves of accession, the EU had 15 member states and prepared for the accession of 13 Eastern and Southern European countries. With the help of the collapsed Soviet Union, 10 of these were implemented, bringing it to a total of 25 member states. On January 1st, 2007, Bulgaria and Romania were welcomed to the EU, bringing the total number to 27. Back to the drawing board. Where's the 10? In 2008, there were 3 more candidate countries waiting in the wings: the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Croatia, and Turkey. Now, Turkey stands there both as an anchor of stability in one of the most unstable and insecure regions in the world, and as a benchmark of democracy for the wider Middle East area. We need to also keep our minds and keep our eyes on Turkey in that location. Revelation 17 again, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which shall receive no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. They don't necessarily have to be kings, but power as kings. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, so we know the time setting. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords, King of kings, and they that are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. And he says unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues, verse 15 says. From the stats 15 years ago, I'm talking here, the EU has brought together 27 nations from the Atlantic to the Black Sea with 23 official languages. In a poll 15 years ago, over 70% of EU citizens want the European Union to play a stronger role in the world. And I think they're about to get what they want, unfortunately. In Revelation 13, the EU held regular summit meetings back then with partners such as the United States, Japan, Canada, as well as with Russia, Ukraine, India, and China. The Union also holds regional dialogues with other countries in Asia, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Latin America. These relationships, focused initially on trade issues, have expanded over the years to cover investment, economic cooperation, finance, energy, science and technology, and environmental protection, as well as the global war on terror, international crime and drug trafficking, and human rights. Verse 1 of Revelation 13 says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." Verse 2, "And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, his feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority." There's Satan involved with all this. "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" Looking back at their activities in Asia, the European Union proposed in 2001 to strengthen its political and economic presence in Asia by broadening engagement in the region, creating policies to improve mutual trade and investment, promoting development in poorer nations, and promoting core EU values. Asia is the number 2 market for EU exports behind North America, with trade and services as increasingly important element. A significant share of EU foreign investments flows to Asia, while some Asian countries are important investors in the EU. This is 15 years ago. In China, the EU and China account for 1/4 of the world's population. China is the world's 4th economic power, 3rd biggest exporter, and wields increasing an international political clout. As China grows, it is entering a new and challenging period of its economic and social reform process. Europe has a major political and economic stake in supporting China's full and successful transition into a prosperous, stable, and open country that embraces the rule of law and free market principles. The EU-China summit in 2006 agreed to launch negotiations on a comprehensive new partnership and cooperation agreement, PCA, that would encompass the full scope of EU-China relations, including enhanced cooperation, quote unquote, in political matters. The EU's new China strategy, introduced in 2006, responds to China's reemergence as a global economic and political power. China is now the EU's 2nd largest trading partner after the US, and the EU became China's largest trading partner in 2004. And look where they're at today. In India, the EU is India's largest trading partner, accounting for 1/5 of India's trade. India's in the news lately. They've gone to the moon now. In Japan, to form a solid strategic partnership, the EU and Japan have agreed to a joint action plan with 4 key objectives: promoting peace and security, enhancing trade, working together to tackle global challenges, and bringing together people and cultures. EU and Japan together have the potential to project joint interests and ideals on a global scale. They involve Africa, the Caribbean and Pacific, Canada, Latin America, Mexico. After the 27 nations of the European Union came together, far beyond the 10 nations after Greece in '81. I had to rethink what I was studying, and there's an old cliche, follow the money, and it holds true today. The Eurozone came into power, it came into being rather. And then there's this that happened 15 years ago. The joint declaration of the Paris Summit for the Mediterranean, Paris, July 13, 2008. And those present at this EU Council meeting, the co-presidency of the President of the French Republic, Mr. Nicolas Sarkozy, who is also President of the European Council and the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. President of the European Commission, Secretary General of the Council of the European Union, High Representative for the Common Foreign and Security Policy, representatives from each of the 27 member states, plus the list goes on. Minister of the State of Israel was there. Minister of the Kingdom of Jordan, Republic of Latvia, Lebanese Republic of Lebanon, Republic of Malta, the Islamic Republic of Maturana, Prince of Monaco, Prince of Morocco, and then there's the Palestinian Authority, Republic of Poland, Syrian Arab Republic, and Republic of Turkey. Secretary General of the United Nations, all were there. President of the European Parliament and President of the Euro-Mediterranean Parliamentary Assembly, EMPA. These were all there, and the list goes on and on. Most importantly, was there President of the African Development Bank, President of the European Investment Bank, Director General of the World Bank. All the money. And last but not least, the United Nations High Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations. What does that mean? President of the Euro-Mediterranean Foundation for a Dialogue Between Cultures at that meeting. Where's the Vatican and Pope doing today? He's doing the same thing. Euro-Mediterranean heads of states and government meeting in Paris on July 13, 2008, inspired by the shared political will to revitalize efforts to transform the Mediterranean into an area of peace, democracy, cooperation, and prosperity, agreed to adopt the following joint declaration. I'm not going to go through this, but look up the Barcelona process and what it involves. Heads of state and government acknowledge the progress and economic benefits of the creation of a deep free trade area in the Euromed, called the region of the Mediterranean Sea area, by 2010 and beyond, and the strengthening of regional economic integration in all its dimensions, 2010 and beyond. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 27. There are many, many documents that you can Google nowadays and look up all this. There's a lot of reading involved, there's a lot of study involved, but there are certain areas that we can concentrate on, mainly Jerusalem and the European Union and the Arab League states, because that's where all heck is going to break loose later on. And the movers and shakers of the world are getting set in place. We've talked about types and antitypes described in the Bible, and we know that in learning the truth of God entails a process that actually lasts a lifetime. You never stop learning through the Bible. Here a little, there a little, line upon line, precept upon precept, quote unquote. If the Prince of Tyre is a type of Lucifer's description before he became Satan the devil, what does this tell us about the city of Tyrus itself, or its characteristics? Verse 1, it says, "The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Now, thou son of man, take up a lamentation for Tyrus, and say unto Tyrus, O thou art situate at the entry of the sea, which art a merchant of the people for many isles or coastlands. Thus says the Lord God, O Tyrus, thou hast said, I am of perfect beauty. Verse 4, Thy borders are in the midst of the seas, thy builders have perfected thy beauty. And then it describes all the riches that all the world had brought through the main shipping port of Tyrus. In verse 24, these were thy merchants in all sorts of things, in blue clothes, broidered work, in chests of rich apparel, bound with cords made of cedar among thy merchandise. The ships of Tarshish did sing of thee in thy market, and thou wast replenished and made very glorious in the midst of the seas. I keep saying the midst of the seas. What's the seas represent? A world population, peoples, tongues, nations. The verses go on to prophesy about the fate of Tyrus by God. In Ezekiel 28, verse 1, it says, The word of the Lord came unto me again, saying, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus says the Lord God, because your heart is lifted up, And you have said, I am God, I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man and not God, though thou set your heart as the heart of God. There's a clue of who this is talking about, isn't it? Behold, you are wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from you. With thy wisdom and with your understanding you have gotten thee riches, and have gotten gold and silver unto your treasures. By thy great wisdom and by thy traffic hast thou increased thy riches, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. They're proud. Therefore thus says the Lord God, because you have set thine heart as the heart of God, behold, therefore I will bring strangers upon thee, the terrible of the nations, and they shall draw the swords against the beauty of thy wisdom, and they shall defile thy brightness. They shall bring thee down to the pit, and you shall die the deaths of them that are slain in the midst of the seas. What's interesting is that this was fulfilled. It was a fulfilled prophecy concerning Tyre, which is also the future fate of the beasts and the false prophets of Revelation. Revelation 16, verse 15, Christ said, Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And he gathers them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Verse 17, and the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done. And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake and so great. Verse 19, and the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Babylon came in remembrance. In verse 1 of Revelation 18, and after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Verse 4, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Skipping down to verse 9, and the kings of the earth, who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning standing afar off, for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, that great city Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment is come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buys their merchandise any more. The merchandise gold and silver and stones, pearls, fine linen, and all thy wood, all manner of vessels, and ivory, all manner of vessels of the most precious wood, of brass, iron, and the list goes on, and wine, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. Today, the physical seaport of Tyre, located off the coast of Lebanon, is nothing more than a small island for local fishermen. God said that it would no longer exist, just as he said concerning the actual city of Babylon. But God uses symbolism throughout his prophecies, duality, types, and antitypes. Beyond Europe, as the beast power with the Vatican as a false prophet, we have a Gentile world system symbolized as Babylon. COVID united the world and gave the world control over all its people. You think about what would trigger certain specific prophecies as we reflect on what has triggered recent events. Looking at a map of the Mediterranean Sea in order for the European Union to move forward, what other seaport would be an ideal central location? And while you're thinking about that, in verse 15 it says, The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off with the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, this great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches has come to nothing, and every shipmaster and all the company of ships and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off. And they cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour she was made desolate. In a very short time. From 15 years ago, here's a couple of facts about the beast. The EU is the world's largest internal trading market. The EU's member states account for almost a third of the entire global economy. The euro is already the second most commonly traded reserve currency and is a strong candidate to displace the dollar as a predominant reserve currency. This was 15 years ago. The EU is the largest trading, economic, scientific, and research partner of Israel, and it is the biggest donor of aid to the Palestinians. They work on both sides here. The EU imports more agricultural goods from developing countries than do the US, Canada, and Japan combined. The EU and its member states provide 54% of global development assistance and is the world's largest contributor of aid to Africa. Transatlantic internet bandwidth between the EU and the US is 3 times that between the US and Asia Pacific region, and 7 times more than that between the US and Latin America. The EU members provide 80% of NATO's international security force at that time in Afghanistan. European troops formed the backbone of the United Nations peacekeeping force in Lebanon. 60,000 European peacekeepers are currently serving around the globe in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In November of 2008, there was another European Council meeting. Those nations, including the Arab League of Nations, agreed to the Declaration for the Union of the Mediterranean Countries with all its agendas. What if that seaport of Rome, Italy, be chosen as a common Arab international port? That would be interesting. Located almost center of the Mediterranean Sea, which they're trying to preserve. Daniel 11, break into the middle of one of the longest prophecies spoken of by the archangel Gabriel to Daniel, says in verse 23, And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people, and enter peacefully even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. And shall scatter among them the prey, spoil riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time. Yea, they that feed of the portion, back in verse 26, of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. He's talking about the kings of the north and the south. Their heart shall be to do mischief, they shall speak lies at one table, and it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall not be until the time appointed. At the time appointed, verse 29, he shall return, come towards the south, but it shall not be as the former or the latter. And verse 30, at the end of that verse, it says, And he shall have intelligence with him that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. A clue of who this is. Verse 36 says, And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Verse 37, Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. Does that sound familiar? The Pope. In his estate shall he honor the God of forces. To me, that's science. It goes on, you can read the rest of that chapter. Verse 41, he shall enter into the glorious land. Many countries shall be overthrown, and these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, the chief children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. And he shall have power over the treasures of gold, silver, over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. From Rome, Italy, in that area, to the south across the Mediterranean Sea lies northern Africa and Libya. You due to the world's economic situation that we have, and the instability of the Middle East soon to come, even more so, and the diversity of cultures in Europe, and most importantly, because prophecy will and must be fulfilled, I have to agree with what was told back in the 50s by Garner Ted and the others, that a 10-nation combine will arise in Europe, and these will be the 10 toes of Daniel 2. They will be the 10 horns of Daniel 7. They will be the 10 kings of Revelation. We don't know what they will be called, but so far they're calling themselves a core Europe. I think today, back in 2016, I think because things have an appointed time with God, that the presidency of Donald Trump slowed things down just a little bit. Otherwise, things would have gone down a lot quicker, as they're doing today. I have no political idea of what's going on. I don't like politics. I don't like religion either. But I know something's about to happen, and I think that we're on the right track with what we're teaching. I think we all need to pray more, fast more, and we look at this Feast of Tabernacles this year, and I look at the days of having a double high day in the beginning and a double high day at the end. I have no idea what's going to happen when we come back, but I don't know. If people in the world see things just aren't right, I think we too ought to study more and more and actually pray and watch also.